Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Major Author Podcast, a podcast that celebrates and spotlights African authors on the continent through collaborative discussions and author interviews. I'm your host, Rachel Chiza. On this episode, I host Ama Asantewa Diaka, a poet, storyteller, and spoken word artist from Ghana. We discuss a new poetry collection, Woman, Eat Me Whole. Hi, Asantewa.
Hi, Rachel.
It's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
How have you been?
I've been okay. It's a sunny day today, so I'm glad for that.
Great.
How about you?
I'm very well. Very well. My end of the world, it looks like it's planning to rain.
Looks like
But
the
it's
rainy
okay.
season.
Yes.
Yeah.
But are you excited to be here? I am so excited.
I am. I'm excited to be here to talk about the work and just interact with people as well.
Ama Asantewa Diaka, aka Poetra Asantewa from Ghana. She's a poet, writer, performer, and designer. She's a storyteller who is committed to community. Her work is focused on investigating, revealing, healing, or addressing affect her community. She's the author of You Too Will Know Me, part of the African Poetry Book Fan Chapbook Collection 2019, and Woman Eat Me Whole, published by Echo.
Thank you for the introduction, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad. And today we're going to talk about Ama's book, Woman Eat Me Whole, her poetry collection that was published this year in April, a collection that explores matters of womanhood, self, and beauty perceptions, culture expectations, mental illness, and so much more. There's just so much embedded in the book that I'm excited for us to get into. But now we're going to start with Ama reading for us one of her favorite poems from Woman Eat Me Whole.
Okay. So when you said I was going to read a favorite poem, I was like, it's hard to pick a poem. That's like asking a parent to pick a favorite child. Typically, they usually have a favorite child, but it's always hard to admit. But I chose this poem because I don't write a lot of. I feel like I don't have a lot of hopeful poems, and this poem is one of the hopeful poems I have, and so I wanted to start with this. Let's start on the hopeful note. Let's start on that really, great note. So this poem is titled A Utopia for Black Girls. Here, home is a rippling effect of joy in continuum, which is to say that there is no need for safe spaces because everywhere is safe. The spring in our step is directly proportional to the elasticity of joy. Our footsteps are fertilizer for bloom because we walk freely. In neighborhoods, our own compounds, in the parking lot, at the grocery store, in a friend's bedroom, at a nightclub, in broad daylight, underneath a bridge in the classroom, unknown places, late at night. Fear is a strange phenomenon we keep hearing of, trying to descend in a spaceship on our land. But as far as we know, shit don't exist. Safety is communion bread that takes its time to melt underneath our tongues. Here, neither Rachel nor Leah need to go through the needle of male validation to attain worthiness. When the gavel hits wood, we are not found guilty of love. Our love is not shoved down our throats as mutilated parts of our own bodies. It is not sliced up like beef and cramped into an airtight container to be buried in a man's backyard. It is not beaten blue until our skins become playground for primary colors to play mix and march. Memory isn't a trigger that belts grief on you. Love does not return back to us empty or broken. Not misfire our brains and turn our emotions into rot. It does not transform our bodies into a putrid scent of trauma here. The loss of our lives does not stink on us while we are still alive. Our breaths are weights that hold secured futures firmly in place. Our names are melodies so gossamer you can carry them in your throat. Our black skins siphon wealth for several tomorrows. Our labor yields fruit 1,000-fold. There are so many smiles per minute, we stitch them into billboards for wandering strangers to soak in for free. Our brown bodies, a climax in spring, bodies dancing wild in sweaty airyness with an abandon that closely resembles unbridled giggle. How wide the soul stretches when the body has freedom to move. What is breaking loose to a free spirit? Here we sing and teach birds into factories, spinning silk for our shimmery skins. We sculpt empathy and code the future, and cook healing into hemlines as hedges for our hefty hips. We build engines and design tomorrow, and palm poems as portals for possibilities. Here, we are eating light, and it tastes like the childlike simplicity of never even knowing of worry to be wary of it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I wonder though, why is this your favorite? Because I don't think it's among the ones that I would mention as my favorite poems. I have, I think, like five
Mhm.
that I would choose as my favorite, and this does not rank among my five.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite, like, because, like I mentioned, I think it's one of the hopeful poems. And a lot of the poems in the book are either, it's like a display. They're either, bringing to light certain issues or certain point of views that I have on certain things. But this poem is an imagination of the future, of the possibility of what the future could look like. And so for me, I really like it because I don't write a lot of hopeful poems. And so it was an exercise in imagining a better future.
Great, and I think we need that hope. We need that hope. Woman, Eat Me Whole. Why that title?
Yeah, so the title was one of the last things that I decided after the book. And if you've read the book, so I know that you know that the book is divided into sections. So there are four sections to the book. The book is in four
Yeah.
parts. And when I was writing the poems, like after I had finished writing everything and I was just, categorizing the poems, there were certain poems that were heavily themed around womanhood. And so I categorized all of them under woman. And there were certain poems where I used the metaphor of eating, whether it was food, I was puking, anything that has to do with the act of ingesting food. There were certain poems that were in line with that theme. And so I categorized them under eat. And then, of course, there were certain poems which were very personal, that had to do with my personhood. And so I categorized them under me. And then there were certain poems which I felt each of those poems were a city on its own. Each of those poems were whole. Like it kind of brings the entire thing to a conclusion. And so those poems were also categorized under the title whole. And that's really how the book title came together. It wasn't that I deliberated on and decided before I started writing. It was something that I came to afterwards when I was putting the entire book together. And that's how come Woman Eat Me Whole came about. I know a lot of people see it and think that it means something on its own, and I'm open to those interpretations. But the actual coming together of the title was because each of these parts, I categorized the poems under each of these parts and decided to name them on their behalf.
What does the book mean to you?
Okay. The book means a lot of things. I think it represents a lot of things for me. Technically, this is my debut collection. It's I have a chapbook before that, but technically, this is my debut, my first collection of, and that's been released. And I think just that for Woman Eat Me Whole to be the first it meant a lot that there are certain poems in this book that were written years ago, and it was important that those books were in print, even though that those poems may have been heard before. It was relevant that they also appeared in print. And so I think the symbol, like first of all, this book symbolizes a lot for me. It symbolizes the first, the beginning of several books to come, the beginning of identifying as an author, and the beginning of poetry as a genre that is, taken seriously, as serious as fiction as well. And so for me, just the book itself, without the content, represents a lot of things for me. But what the book means to me is it was important that I represent certain ideals and themes and beliefs that are very dear to me, or that I have spoken about or talked about heavily throughout my career as a poet. And it would have been so unlikely of me to have released a book and for it not to be linked to womanhood. It just wouldn't have made sense. And so that's also one of the reasons why this book means so much to me. And it's also one of the reasons why I can't wait for Black and Ghanaian women to get hold of the book, because they're the primary audience, and Ghanaian men as well. Like those were the people people like me when I was writing this book. And so it means a lot to me as a symbol, and it means a lot to me as a book, because I talk a lot about my identity as a Black woman, as an artist, as a poet, as a Ghanaian, as a millennial, um, and as a young woman. And I think that all of these identities are relatable one way or the other, to different people, even if you don't specifically identify with, say, being a Ghanaian. There's something about this. There's a poem in this book that you will identify with as a Black person. So yeah.
That's amazing. Did you ever struggle to try and make the book for everyone? Because I know you've emphasized that you wrote it for the Ghanaian audience, like you're pronouncing it. Was that a struggle for you, or it was very clear from the go that, you know what, I'm writing this book for my audience back at home?
Oh yeah, it was quite clear to me. I think it's very hard to think of an audience outside of my local community, I think. Although to be honest, I wouldn't say like the very minute I started writing, I had an audience in mind. And that's because I have had the opportunity to, like, as you know, I'm a performing poet. And so I had the opportunity to be engaged with an audience even before I started putting the book together. And because of that, the work that I was already performing on stage was very mindful of community. It wasn't all personal. It wasn't all me. And so even before I started writing about the book, I had that at the back of my mind. I was already doing that. And so putting it together, um, yeah, I think it was already inbuilt that this is not just about me. However, I wasn't writing every poem and thinking, okay, who is this for? Who is that for? Not necessarily. It was after I finished writing, I guess, and I was putting it together. And the journey to publishing is a very long and difficult one, especially for the genre poetry. So that was also the book changed form. The book, some poems were taken out, some poems were added last minute, etc. So the book has shape shifted from what it used to be when I started it to what it eventually is now.
So right now, is going to read one of my favorite poems from the collection called Jigsaw.
Okay. Jigsaw. I wonder if my parents know the shape of my trauma. I want to call my mother in the dead of night and tell her 1 Corinthians chapter 13 verse 4 to 8 is a love that only exist in the pages of worn-out Bibles. I wonder if my father knows the peak of this body's betrayal, how my pain, the exposed nerve of a broken tooth, hyperlinks to my swaying emotions. How temper spumes at the jaw of this body, high as the gates of Israel, torrential like its wars. How I love men who want me to shrink, and each time how I want them to stay. I wonder if my parents even know I have trauma. If they know it keeps morphing into jigsaws that press into old wounds to create new ones. That I have become a resilient body, wakened to new dawns, testament to a war no one sees me fighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Asantewa. I love how you incorporate the biblical texts into some of your poems, and they go so well with it's like they fit perfectly. And I think for Jigsaw, it made me think about generational trauma that we've read about in so many books, but also I think from my own experience, the trauma that I've experienced, and how many times, like the line that you use, I want to call my mother in the dead of night and tell her 1 Corinthians 13:4-8 is a love that only exists in the pages of worn out Bibles. And I know that for Bible readers, this is a text that's been read so many times. At weddings, it's recited over and over again, that we should know it and we should, I think, be practical about it. But indeed, it seems like that kind of love only exists in the pages of our worn out Bibles. I love that line.
Yeah.
Was that intentional on your part to incorporate the biblical texts into your writing?
Yes, it was intentional. And I think to be very my biblical affinity seeps into my poetry a lot. Like there are certain poems where I use the form of the Bible. So like there are certain poems in the form of verses, or there are certain poems where I you know, I draw an imagery from a story or something that's in the Bible. So I think it's something that I don't even realize I'm doing until I'm done writing the poem. But yeah, this was intentional because, like you said, that verse is very, I think even for non-Christians, you've seen the poem, love is kind, love is patient, love is like, it goes on and on and on. Everybody has kind of seen that. It looks and feels very much like an unconditional love, but it's very preached about. So that was to include that line in that. It was a very direct link to that poem, to that verse.
Yeah, which is brilliant. It works so well and helps the reader to sit back and reflect on that kind of love and what they have. I just need us to get to know more about you away from Woman Eat Me Whole. Who is Asantewa? What else do you do?
Asantewa is a writer. I write poetry. I also write fiction. I write nonfiction, but it's not my favorite genre. But yes, I write. It's not just poetry, but poetry is my first love and will remain my first love. But yes, I think that I do a lot of things, but at the core of my multiple identities, writing is at the core of all of them, and writing is how I navigate my way through things. Writing is how I explain things to myself and explain things to other people. And so writing is a very core part of my identity. But yes, I don't only write. I also very much believe in community. And I think it's very, especially coming from a place like Ghana, and I think this is not just limited to Ghana, but in a place where we don't have structures for the arts, like artists then have to resort to also building systems to sustain themselves. And so because of that, I have been very entrenched in community for the last 5 or 6 years as well. And so there are also two other communities that I'm heavily involved with. And one of them is Champered Press, which is a literary, an art journal, and slowly inching towards being a publisher as well. which was a space that I felt was very relevant because I remember when I was writing 5, 6 years ago, I wanted to see myself published. Like I had been posting on Facebook Notes, if anybody remembers Facebook Notes. I'd been posting there. I had a blog. I still have a blog. I had been posting there, but it all felt very isolated. It felt just like you. It's just like you and your friends reading your work. And I wanted the work to be seen beyond my circle. And I know that literary journals and, online journals, newspapers, they're also an avenue to get published as writers. But we didn't really have that space. And not to say that I was the first person to start it in Ghana. Like we always start these things, but the sustenance of them is quite difficult.
Yeah.
And I remember I kept we will all be like, it felt like at some point in time, all of us were applying to New Yorker, Paris Review, because that's the one on the international platform. And I think I saw it was like a conversation that I had with an artist, or whether I saw it online, that brought to mind the thought that like all these people have their local markets as well. Paris Review has its market. Ohio Review has its markets. All of these people, they have their local target. And so they receive work. They're most likely going to have an affinity towards work that is in alignment with what's happening on the local ground. If I write about Makola market, or I write about Ekufuado, or I write about it's not so much that it's not important, but the affinity to a foreign audience is quite far. And so the local spaces are needed for us ourselves before we move on to the international platform. And that was what really motivated me to start Tampered Press. And it's supposed to be a space to showcase other Ghanaian writers, a space to, nurture our arts, workshops, train each other, see what we are writing within our local system, and learn from it, as well as just see the rising writers that is in our environment. And so that's how Tampered Press came about. And it's been going, I think Tampered Press is 4 years this year. And so it's been a joy. And it's been hard, but it's really been a joy to see it get to where it is.
Congratulations on the 4 years.
Thank you. And then I'm the director for Black Girls Glow, which is an organization that came about because, again, so beyond being a performance poet, I also sing a little. But, in the performance space, as long as we're using sound, we're all artists. And it's very hard. It was very hard to men collaborate. Beyond the collaboration, there just weren't enough spaces for women to congregate and create together and work together. It's extra hard for women to break through in the arts. And so to just think about ways that we can make it easier. So just come together and, create together, talk together, and collaborate, hopefully, together. And that's how come Black Girls Glow came about. And it's been 5 years. It's been a great community to see it build year in and year out. And we are hoping that it expands beyond Ghana. Yeah. So that's that about me.
All right. Thank you for that. I was wondering about the sustainability of, I know you've done 4 years of Tampered Press now and 5 years of Black Girls Glow. What's the sustainability of the arts project or the art sector in Ghana? Because I know in Uganda it's up and about, but everyone is doing and everyone is trying to sustain something, but without proper funding structures, I think it's difficult to imagine the sustainability 4 or 5 years down the road.
Yeah. To be honest, funding is a struggle. Funding is a struggle in the arts in general. And I don't know if anybody is listening, but I think that, even when there are funds available, it is so incredibly hard to access it because you need to, provide all these kind of documentation or evidence of work done. And even with that done, there's still a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of whom. So funding is a big problem. But what has really helped with both Tampered Press and Black Girls Glow has been a collaboration. Collaboration is a sustenance model. That really is what has kept it going. I have to be honest and say I don't know if it can keep it going for another 5 years. Because at the end of the day, it is a service. It's a service that's being rendered. And if that service is going to thrive as long as it needs to, so that all artists or other people can benefit from it, then it has to be, and for it to be more fixed, it means it has to be paid. And that's where funding comes in. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that we can, have a longer solution to our funding struggles. But what has really kept it going is that Black Girls Glow has emerged into a community. And so even though it identifies as an organization, it is run by artists. Black Girls Glow is solely run by artists, and that's really what has kept the organization going till now. Yeah.
I love what you say, that collaboration is a sustenance model, because it's easier to do things with people and go forward than try to do everything by yourself, which I think is really difficult to do and achieve.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have more collaborations and the projects are able to be sustainable beyond what we ever imagined. So we're going to have another poetry break where Asantewa will read Let It Be, one of my other favorite poems from the collection. So Asantewa, over to you.
Let it be. I have been fretting over things that God shakes his head at, toying with faith as if it were a disappearing act. 1 minute, I'm full of it. The next, I don't exactly know the shape of it. I fret over now and tomorrow, giving myself and God a headache. Spoon feed myself faith and come up hungry again. I have taken up all the space on my mother's prayer sheet, and the happiness of those I love takes up all of mine. At the end of the day, in God's ears, saying, let it be.
Thank you. I think when I read this, I was just reminded of the state of anxiety that I'm constantly in. And no matter how many times I fret and keep at God's ears, I'm still in the state of anxiety day in, day out. And I'm learning to get to that place of just letting things be. That poem resonated with me so much, so much. Okay, I don't know let me get the name right. Weko, if you would like to say something, or if you have a poem that you would like Ama to read or recite for us.
Good afternoon. Yes, Asantewa. Hi, everyone. Want to make a request, dear Nalom.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could kindly do dear Nalom. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. 1 second while I look for dear Nalom.
That's all right. Kitara Nation, did you poem for Asantewa to recite, or would you like to ask a question?
To ask a question. Unfortunately, we've not been able to read Asantewa's poetry yet or access the books in Uganda. But the question that I have is, as poets who also dabble between publishing and performance on a regular, would like to ask Asantewa about her experience of page poetry and stage poetry, especially when it comes to when it came to the process of adapting her works for the page. Was it how was the experience like for you as a poet who who constantly performs? Were there any changes that you had to make to your poetry to accommodate your listeners, or rather to accommodate your reader, or to accommodate your readers and your listeners at the same time? Were there some poems you wrote specifically to be read? And how about the poems that you had originally written to be performed? Did they change in the process of you trying to publish them? Thank you.
Okay, for me, I always start from the page. Even if it's a poem that's going to be performed, I always start from the page. And so I've never felt like the poetry that is presented on the page and the poetry that is presented on the stage are different. So generally that's always been my approach. I just happen to have an extension of a voice for the stage. And so when I am on stage, let's just say you get an add-on, but the poetry remains the same for me, whether it's on the page or on the stage. However, I will say that because I have the experience of stage, because I have the experience of performing the poetry out loud, it makes me more particular of how I want the work to be perceived on the page. And so I employ certain forms that will ensure that people, at least there's how they read it is as close as I want them to read. So I'm going to give a very short example. So for instance, there's a poem in this book titled Restart. And the first line is in, let's say, font size 12. But the next consecutive lines are in smaller font. And that's because I wanted there to be a difference. Like the main point I'm giving is the one in the bigger font. And so if I were performing this, for the first line, I would sound louder, but the next one would be near whisper. So if that makes sense, I use form to try and navigate or to try and lead the reader into how I want them to perceive it. So for me, that's been my experience. That's how I work around it. But at the core of it, the writing on the page for me isn't different from the writing on the stage. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, cool. I'm going to read. Now, Dear Nalom, in this book, it's titled A Good Day for Redemption. I know that it's on my EP, it's Dear Nalom, but in the book, it's titled A Good Day for Redemption. Dear Nalom, now that we both agree our 20s are home to ruin, our bodies have become liberation grounds for redemption. The late night calls, the salt-laced shots, the outrageous 20-city taxi fare for a 10-minute journey after 1 a.m., the tipsy laughter, the pitiful ritual of guilt-tripping others by disappearing, whole month parts drilled into our black holes in search of missing orgasms. We've both been pretending we've seen the light at the end of the goddamn awful tunnel. But we were so eager to claim this adulthood title we forgot we hadn't grown up. Truth be told, if I could have the cockiness with which naivety knew your body's address and rented space there in your adolescence, I would snatch it. The freedom that comes with not knowing enough about the cruelty of the world to remember to be ashamed of your body. The short length of time it takes to get ready to step out because you're not pinching or poking or burrowing like your skin is target practice for greenhorns. An old lover once told me he was sitting on an undiscovered gold mine because he was dating a flat-chested girl he hoped would become voluptuous in the future. And my face lit up because I believed myself an undiscovered gold mine. You can blame everything on youth if you're drunk enough. His illegal touch, food spiced with low self-esteem, a body that doesn't know how to forgive itself. Nalam. My high school dormitory was built on an old cemetery. The way I see it, either we are feeding off the dead, or dead things were laid here to rest so we could live as they knew. The Old Testament God promised joy in the morning, but there's no way of telling time in dark tunnels. So any day is a good day for redemption.
Picking up on the question that Guitar Nation asked about stage poetry as well as page poetry, I think for me it's more into the publishing poetry because I know that Guitar Nation, it's a poetry publishing outfit, and they've been doing a lot of that for Ugandan poetry. I think I just want to hear what's the landscape like when it comes to publishing poetry in Ghana, to know whether it's any different, or what are the challenges faced when it comes to publishing your poetry.
Okay. So, well, this book was published by a US publisher. So
Okay.
it wasn't published by a Ghanaian publisher. And I took this traditional route because, yes, I wanted to find out, like, I wanted to learn, what really the process is for publishing your book worldwide, not just for myself, but also a community. So when you say the poetry publishing landscape in Ghana, I have to go and say the general publishing landscape there are very, very few publishing opportunities here. A lot of writers self-publish. And self-publishing is great, it's not bad, but it means that you have to do all the work. You have to market, design, you have to distribute. And that's a lot of work for one poet to do or one writer to do. So the publishing landscape here is also a challenge, really. It is a challenge. And the process of publishing my book, like I said, I took the traditional route, which was finding an agent, and which is a very tedious and long process for poetry, because first of all, there are very, very few agents for poetry, and so getting an agent to broker a deal for your book, a poetry book, is a challenge. But once you do get an agent, it becomes seemingly easier, or at least it moves forward from there. So you get a publishing deal, and then once you get a publishing deal, you go through the publishing process itself of getting your book marketed, designed, your cover, etc. So that is the tradition. In Ghana, I would say that it doesn't exist like that. It's about, I would say, 90% self-publishing, at least for fiction, poetry, and non-fiction genre, like creative writing. What exists in our publishing industry here are textbooks, and mostly textbooks. I would say that's it. But like I mentioned, that's one of the things that I'm hoping that I can move into here, and with Tamped Press, to slowly, kind of very, very slowly, because publishing is a very big industry which requires a lot of work, but to slowly take that on as well and see how we can conquer the market, for lack of a better word, in Ghana. Yeah.
Okay, I like that. I like the goal that you have to conquer the marketing world in Ghana. Because I think in Uganda it's really the same thing. We have, though it's changing now, but we have a lot of textbooks on the market, and it's easier to get those published.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are people now, say like Itara Nation, that's solely publishing poetry. So we know that if you need poetry by Ugandan poets, that's the place to go to, and you'll be assured of getting many of them.
And now we'll have Asantewa read to us The Audacity of Men.
Days after a stranger kisses your lips without permission, you struggle to give language to the way you feel. Filth doesn't feel very far from the surface. It lingers like a dead rat taken forever to decompose. And guilt lives underneath. But trapped guilt is like mercury. It will slip through the tiniest crack. And you carry it quietly, waiting for an opportunity to thrash it. Because how else do you make sense of a random, unknown man whose muscle memory dares entertain the thought of touching a woman without her consent? How else?
Thank you. I really hope that everyone is able to get Asantewa's poetry and is able to read it. I know it's also available on Scribd as an audiobook. So that's, I think, a fantastic way to listen. Were you the narrator for the audiobook?
Yes, I was. I was a narrator for the audiobook.
Perfect. So if you want to hear more of Asantewa, get to Scribd, listen to the audiobook. I think reading and listening for me is a treat. Being able to read the poems and then listen to them is such a treat. So I hope that everyone is able to do that. Thank you for being here, Asantewa. Thank you so much for saying yes to this, for being very gracious with your time, with your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to everyone who made the time to be here. It's been a pleasure to have you be an audience to our session.
Thank you for tuning in today. Don't forget to follow Asantewa on Twitter and Instagram at poetra_Asantewa. Follow Meet Your Author on Twitter at AuthorMeet. And don't forget to click the subscribe button for more author conversations. This episode was powered by Goethe Zentrum Kampala. You can follow them on Facebook at Goethe Zentrum Kampala, Instagram at GZK_Kampala.